topic is the evaluation and management of the tubercular hip. And these are the learning objectives as we go one by one about them. So tuberculosis is as old as probably the history of mankind. TB lesions have been found even in the Egyptian mummies and in the old Greco-Roman civilization, and in India it was called as the yakshma. Now, one-third of the world population is infected with tuberculosis, active or latent. And between India and China, we have 40% of world's TB cases. Skeletal tuberculosis is 1 to 3% of all cases and 10% of the extrapulmonary TB. The TB hip itself is 15 to 20% of the osteoarticular tuberculosis. Second to spine in a ratio of 10:7. It's common in first 3 decades and it is more common in males. Let's talk about the microbiology. So we have Mycobacterium tuberculosis, which is the thin rod with round ends. It's about 2 to 2.5 micron long. It's non-motile, non-capsulated, and it's acid fast. The Mycobacterium africum is common in the continent, and Mycobacterium bovis is prominent in the places where milk is not pasteurized. And then we have the Mycobacterium avis, which is seen in the immunocompromised patients. It's a strict arrow, grows in the enriched LJ media. It is very slow growing, takes about 4 to 6 weeks to grow, and you can detect it faster with a liquid media with radiometric growth called BACTEC. It can be available in 1 to 2 weeks. Now about the pathophysiology and pathogenesis, it always starts with a primary focus, which could be active or latent. And it usually takes about 2 to 3 years for that primary focus to cause a hematogenous spread, and then it spreads to the joint or the bone and causes osteoarticular tuberculosis. So bacilli can reach the joint space either through the synovium, that's a synovial focus, which has a protracted slow-growing course, or it can be epiphysis or metaphysis, which is an osseous focus, which is quite common in the hip. Now, the hypertrophy of the synovium and congestion causes the effusion. The thickened tissue with inflammatory infiltrate spreads as spanners, causes erosion and destruction. There are flakes of necrosed articular cartilage called the rice bodies in the joint. And then the effective chemotherapy leads to thickened fibrotic tissue and granulation tissue and may lead to fibrous ankylosis. The osseous focus is common in metaphysis in children and in the ends of the bones in adults. Radiologically, you see the local destruction and marked demineralization. You would remember that the juxta-articular osteoporosis is seen in rheumatoid arthritis and tuberculosis as two typical conditions. And then the metaphyseal lesions can infect the joint space. It involves the subaerial space, joint capsule, and can lead to destruction of the epiphysis. So this is typically the diagram you should remember. The acetabular roof is the most common site, followed by the femoral head or epiphysis, followed by the femoral neck, and then the greater trochanter. Now, the cold abscess can be because of exudative reaction. It consists of white blood cells, serum, caseous material, bone debris, bacilli, etc. It penetrates the ligament and through the various facial planes may track into the various potential areas, spaces around the hip joint. Now, let's talk about the natural history of the disease. So, in untreated cases, the disease of hip joint passes through different stages, which are as follows. The first one is a tubercular synovitis, early arthritis, advanced arthritis, and then advanced arthritis with subluxation or dislocation. Now, the stage of synovitis leads to apparent lengthening and the flexion, abduction, external rotation deformity. The stage of early arthritis causes apparent shortening with the deformity of flexion, adduction, and internal rotation. The stage of advanced arthritis causes true shortening with the same deformities with shortening, and the stage of advanced arthritis with dislocation causes true shortening with dislocation of the hip joint. Now, the stages of the tuberculosis, this is how they look on the radiological picture, just for you to see the degree and the extent to which it progresses. The clinical features consist of classical, like I said, the first 3 decades are the commonmost age group. There is often a history of contact, but it may not be there. Presenting symptoms have been described very nicely by Dr. Lalit Mani for any hip disease. So you'll have all those. The pain can be insidious. This could be mild or intermittent. The typical thing about tubercular joint involvement is night cries. During the daytime, the muscle spasm keeps the damaged ends of the bones away. When the patient sleeps, the muscles relax and the damaged bone ends come together and cause severe pain, and the patient gets up with severe pain and cries. Radiation to groin is common, and the pain is often increased at the end of the day. There can be constitutional symptoms like fever, anorexia, weight loss, malaise, and fatigue, though you can see tubercular involvement of the joint without these features. The limp is early stages is because of the stiffness and flexion deformity, which causes the body to bend forward. When disease progresses, the patient gets a limp due to pain from the rubbing together of the damaged bone ends, which are denuded of the cartilage. And in advanced stages, the limp is because of the true shortening. And this is actually the video which is supposed to show you the limp in a patient with tubercular arthritis, which is actually, you can see it's quite marked. The examination shows wasting of muscles, joint line tenderness. In a hip joint, it will be in the front, on the side, or on the back. The deformity depends on the stage. Attempted movements cause pain and spasm. There's global reduction of range of motion when the hip becomes arthritic. There could be inguinal lymphadenopathy, or there could be sinus fistula or cold abscess, though we don't see it very common now. This is a picture showing the wasting of the thigh muscles on the affected side. This is showing you the flexion deformity of the hip, and this is showing you the adduction deformity, and you can see the pelvis is not square. On the affected side, which is the left side, the ASIS is at a higher level, which you can square, get the joining ASIS perpendicular to body axis by adducting and putting it in the position of deformity, as Dr. Kapoor told you. The radiological finding consists of the Femister triad, which includes the juxta-articular osteoporosis, peripheral erosions in non-weight-bearing areas of the joint, and gradual joint space narrowing. Most commonly, it's a monoarthritis, and fibrous ankylosis is more common than bony ankylosis, and reactive bone formation is not seen. That's how you can differentiate it from the pyogenic arthritis. This is the Shanmugasundaram radiological classification of tuberculosis. So the first is the normal type, which is minimal disease, only synovial disease without any subchondral involvement. Then is the traveling acetabulum type, where there's a destruction of bony acetabulum and weight-bearing part of the acetabulum is eroded and the femoral head migrates. Then there is the dislocating type, where the partially dislocating head with adductor spasm, and the capsule is weakened and ruptured by chronic inflammation, giving rise to the dislocating type. The Perthes type is superiorlateral disease with destruction of the head. You can have the presence of cyst and acetabular osteopenia. If you look at it, it looks quite like a Perthes disease. Then the protrusio acetabular type, where there's a softening of the medial wall of the acetabulum, and that gives rise to a protrusio type. And then there's an atrophic type, which is a stage of destruction when the disease burns out due to minimal infection. And you see this is the kind of picture. And then mortar and pestle, where there's a gross destruction of the head and acetabulum acquires a saucer-like shape. There's a paper in IGO where the author Dr. Anil Agarwal et al. Have described an unclassified type, which is essentially, according to them, the triradiate involvement of the primary the disease, where the focus is really there. Now, these have also been linked to the results. So the good results are seen in 92% of normal type, 80% of Perthes type, 50% of dislocated type, and 29% of traveling acetabulum type. And if the joint space is reduced to 3 millimeter or less, then the outcome is poor. About the diagnosis and the diagnostic test, the direct diagnosis is possible by a smear looking for this staining for AFB. You can see it if there are more than 10 bacilli per cubic millimeter. That's very unusual, because we know that the osteoarticular tuberculosis is a pauciarticular, paucibacillary kind of disease. So it is very uncommon to find the bacteria, and still many centers, particularly when they don't have many facility, would like to aspirate the joint and subject it to the smear. The culture in the LJ medium, like I said, the BACTEC, which gives you the earlier diagnosis, the histopathology shows caseous necrosis with granuloma formation, and then molecular diagnostics like NAAT, PCR, and they are actually highly specific types. This Smear microscopy is more for an associated lung lesion. Like I said, it's a less sensitive technique. And if you have a sputum, you ask the patient to come twice, which is a difficulty. And it is only used in the absence of better alternatives. Culture, of course, is a gold standard, but then it is got sensitivity of only 30 to 80%. But the bigger problem is that it takes very long, and the specificity is about 100%. And like as I said, you have automated liquid culture system. It can give you slightly quicker diagnosis. Gene Expert, like I said, is a fully automated diagnostic molecular test using nucleic acid amplification. It simultaneously detects the tuberculosis and rifampicin drug resistance, which is because of the RPO-B gene, and its use has been encouraged under the Expand TB initiative. And the indirect diagnosis, like tuberculin skin tests, are not very specific. It's a delayed type hypersensitivity. Its more importance lies in a negative reaction in immunocompetent patient, which almost rules out the diagnosis. And then the ESR and CRP are not very reliable, but can be used to assist in the diagnosis. Now, you can also look at the sensitivity of the drug, and then there are two ways, which is the DST and the line probe assays. The broad ways to test the drug resistance or sensitivity is one is the phenotypic and the second is the genotypic. Now, in the phenotypic, there are two models. One is you inoculate the specimen on two media. One has got the drug, the other one doesn't have a drug. So if the drug is able to inhibit the growth of the bacteria, then it means that it is sensitive to that drug. The other method is indirect, which is actually the gold standard, where actually the specimen is grown in a culture to a significant sizable volume, and then the testing is done on that. Of course, this takes a much longer time. The genotypic type of tests are the molecular tests which aim at detecting the gene mutations responsible for drug resistance. So there are two main types of genotypic assays. The Beacon assay, which is the Gene Expert, which can give you an idea about the rifampicin resistance. And if you have that, then you are well advised to go for line probe assay, which is actually detects the SNPs and the direct mutations, which can tell you about the INH resistance as well. About the treatment, the aims of the treatment are to cure the patient and restore the quality of life and productivity, to prevent the late effects of osteoarthritis of the joint, to prevent relapse, and to prevent the development of the drug resistance. The chemotherapy is the mainstay of the treatment. There's no universal consensus on therapeutic guidelines. I'll give you what is mostly agreed upon, and the treatment can be classified into drug sensitive and drug resistant. So these are the first line drugs and their daily dosages. All of you must know that. Remember, not only that, but also the mechanism of action and the contraindications, which is very important. And you can be asked in the exam, and it's really a crime not to know your anti-tubercular drugs very well. And then there are second drugs which are used for MDR TB, which can be some of the first line oral drugs. It can be injectable, it can be fluoroquinolines, it can be oral bacteriostatic drugs, which are second line agents and agents with unclear role, and you must be conversant with these as well. The index TB guidelines say that for most of the stages, you have to give 2 months of 4-drug regime, which is the rifampicin, INH, pyrazinamide, and ethambutol, followed by 10 to 16 months of 3 drugs, which is rifampicin, INH, and ethambutol. And this is an 18-month course. And you can see that in these guidelines, the rest of the recommendations are about the specific treatment for the joint, but the chemotherapy is almost the standard for this. Now, general principles for MDR TB are that you have to use at least 4 drugs. Many times you have to use more than 4 drugs. It should be based on the drug susceptibility test pattern. And then, of course, you must include drugs from group 1 to 5 in hierarchical order and their potency. And the duration of the intensive phase depends on the treatment with the injectable. That is how you treat the MDR TB. About the care of the hip, you traction prevents or corrects the deformity, gives the rest to the joint, releases the muscle spasm, maintains the joint space, and minimizes the chance of development of migrating acetabulum and the weight is 0.45 kg per year of age bilaterally. Remember, you have to give it bilaterally and not unilaterally. The hip mobilization exercises within the limits of pain, and then of course the hip spica is not used anymore now. It's very cumbersome. Even today, I'll use a hip spica in selected cases. If the joint is gone, there's a fibrous ankylosis, patient has pain, and the position is not functional, I'll take the patient to the theater under anesthesia and see if I can correct the deformity till it is in a functional position, and then put the patient in a hip spica. These days, I'll put them in a single hip spica, not the 1.5 spica, and let them walk on the good leg and keep the spica on for 6 weeks or so till the time the hip becomes stiff in a functional position. The surgery indications are inadequate response to chemotherapy alone, inadequate outcome of chemotherapy, painful or deformed joint, and advanced disease with unstable hip. The procedures are the joint debridement and synovectomy, arthrodesis, arthroplasties, and corrective osteotomies. The joint debridement helps in many ways. You can get histopathological confirmation of the disease. You can reduce the disease load, the organism load, the better vascularity. The synovectomy helps in healing drugs locally. It can help in the correction of deformity because the spasm is taken care of because the joint becomes less pain. But you take care not to disrupt the retinacular vessels and not to dislocate the joint. And the curettage of cystic lesion and bone grafting can be done, wound closure and hip spica. And this is like what I said, for a stage where the joint is not salvageable. However, I would be more inclined to do a synovectomy in a joint where the joint is salvageable, hip movements are possible, cartilage is maintained. That would be a bigger indication for me. The complications are avascular necrosis, slip of the proximal femoral epiphysis in children, and the fractures. The hip arthrodesis is infrequently done procedure, but you must know about it. It can be intra-articular or extra-articular. You must know the different approaches and different techniques for doing that. And also the position of the hip arthrodesis is very important. It's usually a minimum of 10 degree for 1 degree of flexion every year of age, starting with a minimum of 10 degree and a maximum of 30 degree, which means in an 11-year-old child, it will be 11 degrees, and in a 25-year-old adult, it will be 25 degrees. You should give an external rotation of 5 to 10 degrees and no abduction or adduction. Contraindications to arthrodesis are uncontrolled active infection, degenerative changes of the lumbar spine, opposite hip, or ipsilateral knee, or the arthrodesis of the other joint on the ipsilateral or contralateral side. Excisional arthroplasty is another way if the patient wants a mobile hip, but it's not exactly painless. It causes shortening and instability. It's a kind of pseudoarthrosis. Complications are infection and wound complications, unstable hip with lurch, pain after a few years, and degenerative changes in the spine. Replacement arthroplasty is aimed to give you a painless, stable, mobile hip. Prerequisites are preferably the joint should be quiescent clinically and radiologically, and there should be stable serology. These days, many people do MRI to see whether there's any disease left there, particularly if the patient has recently had ATT, but then you are best advised to not mention that unless the examiner probes you. So the summary for surgical indication is the clinically not responding TB, failure to obtain acceptable outcome after conservative treatment, and painful heel disease due to secondary osteoarthritis. If the patient wants painless, unstable hip, it is it's Girdlestone. There will be movements which will be preserved. Painless fixed hip will be arthrodesis, and painless mobile hip will be the total hip arthroplasty. Just a few technical tips for total hip arthroplasty post-TB. There has to be perioperative ATT, even if the patient has had heel disease for a long time. There's no consensus on duration. We started 2 weeks before and continue it for 3 months later if the disease is otherwise well healed. And then, of course, the flexion and internal rotation deformity needs the release of anterior capsule. Adduction deformity will need release of adductors, and osteoporotic nature of acetabulum has to be kept in mind while preparation. So timing of surgery is debatable. It's anything from 3 months after starting ATT to 10 years or more. And like I said, now more and more literature says that you can do it anytime you like, but then you must start them on ATT. Both cemented and cementless hips are good enough. And this is one illustrative case where where there was, you can see classical tuberculosis picture, and tuberculosis can be a very useful option for these patients. Contraindications are chronic discharging sinus, significant medical conditions, skeletal immaturity, and other contraindications. This is one just message for you that these days, because of the some of the patients who are on disease modifying agents for biologicals for inflammatory arthritis, they can have tuberculosis periprosthetic joint infection. In the same way, joint replacement done for tuberculosis can have a recrudescence anytime. This is a paper systematic review which has said that it can be done safely, but you and gives you the technical details. You should go through it. And this is a paper which talks about the total hip replacement in acute tuberculosis from Korea. So to summarize, hip is the second most common site for skeletal TB. Hematogenous spread occurs from primary focus. Untreated disease passes through 4 stages. Gardner's, the gene expert is the most important diagnostic test available, which is quick also. No consensus regarding regime of ATT. Total hip replacement can be done in cases of active TB, and recurrence of TB in total hip arthroplasty done for TB can be managed with chemotherapy. Thank you very much for your